Hello, everybody. Welcome to this live stream tonight. So the topic we're going to talk about tonight, I know a bunch of you were struggling with because we've talked to you about it in messenger conversations, or you let us know when you join the group. And so I'm excited we're finally getting around to teaching about chronic pain. It's also incredibly common if you're suffering from chronic pain that you might also be dealing with anxiety and depression. So today we're going to be talking about the relationship between the two, how our emotions and nervous system states pretty much universally help to create and perpetuate a certain type of chronic pain. And that type of chronic pain actually accounts for about 85% of cases of chronic pain. So this is also going to lead to, at the end, a solution that legitimately really works and is validated in the research for helping you to resolve both. So stay tuned. If you're one of those people struggling with both, you're going to learn a lot in this presentation. In fact, I presented this kind of information at a doctor level, both to a conference of a lot of different types of doctors last year, and also to medical students going through their training about musculoskeletal disorders and pain disorders. And both groups were wowed, actually. And it was very clear that they were not up on the literature on chronic pain. So that's super common. So if your doctor doesn't know any of this information, that would not be abnormal. It takes quite a while for research to really trickle down into the medical profession so that everybody is really aware of it and integrates it into their practice. So tonight's live stream, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into chronic pain with you guys and how chronic pain really interlaces with not only anxiety, but depression, nervous system dysregulation in general, emotions, how all those things not only can perpetuate chronic pain, but can actually help to create it in the first place. And in pretty much all cases do. In the case of pain that's being generated solely by the brain, which, as you'll learn, is the majority of cases of chronic pain. So I'm Dr. Karen Curitin. I'm co-founder of Wired for Wellness, a group coaching program where we help people to recover from chronic anxiety, depression, trauma, chronic illness, and chronic pain using brain rewiring techniques and functional medicine. And I'm also a licensed naturopathic physician and licensed acupuncturist. And I've been practicing neuroplasticity with clients and patients for quite a few years now. So I'm super excited to be here to tell you maybe some things that you've never learned about pain because they are still not common knowledge. Even your doctor may not actually be up on this research, and that's pretty common. So I hope that you take a lot away from this, more than anything, a route to recovery if you are one of those people struggling with chronic pain. So as we're going to talk about, over 85% of cases of chronic pain now are estimated to not be due to injury, old or new, and not because of inflammation, actually just because of changes that occur in the brain over the course of time of having pain. So basically the brain takes over a generation of the pain, and it really doesn't have anything to do with the body at a certain point. And we've got some really cool research to illustrate that at this point, and we're going to show you some of that. So I'm not going to go into my story for this presentation. If you want to hear my story of recovery using neuroplasticity from over 17 years of chronic illness, including some painful conditions, you can check out the 7-part free course for that. But I will say that part of the reason we're so passionate about using neuroplasticity to resolve chronic pain and help other people do so is because one of our founding members, Coach Patty Norris, that was her story. That was her main struggle, was with chronic pain. And so she actually recovered from quite a long history of chronic pain using neuroplasticity techniques when nothing else worked. So you'll hear more about her story a little later in this presentation. So you might be asking already at the start of this presentation, like, wait, why hasn't my doctor broached the subject with me that maybe my chronic pain is not because I have a bulging disc, or it's not because maybe I have arthritis in my knee, that it could actually just be my brain? Most of the time, doctors are not trained in medical school in tools like these, in neuroplasticity tools. And many therapists and psychologists are not trained in these tools, mostly because these tools are rapidly being refined based on modern research. And what's taught in schools is often old data it's often not updated frequently enough. So if your doctor has really just tried to shove Band-Aid solutions at you, which don't resolve the chronic pain, they just make it temporarily a little bit better, like drugs, heat, ice, chiropractic, massage, injection, surgery, or anything else, it's absolutely not the only option. In over 85% of cases, resolution is possible in chronic pain. So let's talk about pain, how pain actually works, to build the foundation that really shows you why you can resolve chronic pain through your brain. So if you think of pain as a danger signal, you would be right. In the context of acute pain due to an injury, its purpose is to be a protective mechanism, right? It's produced by the brain to keep you from hurting that area further. So if you bang your elbow, your brain's going to make some pain there so that you don't bang it again, right? And make the injury potentially worse. However, interestingly enough, an injury of any kind is not required for someone to feel pain. And even if there is an injury, that alone is also not enough for someone to feel pain. Research has also revealed that other types of sensations from the body can also trigger pain depending on the meaning the brain is making of that sensory data. So that could be things like light touch, vibration, non-dangerous temperature changes, right? Mild temperature changes, humidity changes, light pressure, all those kinds of things in a certain person whose brain has become hypersensitized to those signals can trigger pain. And that happens when the brain decides those types of sensations are a threat. We also know now that pain can be generated solely by the brain without any input from the body at all. Yeah, pretty interesting. And dramatic bodily injury actually results in no pain in many cases. So we're going to see some examples of that. Why is that? Well, it's because the brain always has the last say on whether pain is created. And many different types of information are processed to determine if a pain response is appropriate in that situation. Some of the things your brain is processing to make that decision are your current thoughts, your emotions in the moment, your past experiences, your belief systems, and other sensory data coming in through your senses and through your body about the whole context that the quote unquote danger signaling, that's what I'm going to call pain signaling, because it's not really pain signaling when it's in the body. It does not become pain until it goes to the brain, and the brain decides if it should be pain. So ultimately, the brain's decision about whether or not to produce pain is based on whether it's helpful for your survival in that moment. So if you didn't have a brain, you also would never have pain. So I want to be very clear before we move any further, because some of you have been gaslit or told that your pain isn't real, or have been accused of making it up. And so I want to be very clear that regardless of what type of pain we're talking about, whether it's acute or chronic, whether it's brain mediated or bodily injury or inflammation mediated, all pain is real and it all hurts. So what we now know, though, is that the brain makes mistakes sometimes about what is and is not a threat that warrants the protective response of pain. And that's just the same way that it makes mistakes about what warrants other survival responses, right? Because we're talking about pain as a protective mechanism to aid our survival. But we also know that our autonomic nervous states, right, fight, flight, and freeze, are the other protective mechanisms that the brain can engage when it perceives there's a threat. And the brain makes mistakes with those all the time too. So for all you folks out there struggling with anxiety or panic attacks, I know you can relate to this. Sometimes your brain will react to something with anxiety or with a panic attack that isn't really dangerous, right? But you get anxious about it anyway, and it feels uncontrollable. Am I right? Yeah, that's because your brain made the decision that that was a threat and it made a mistake. So that might be something like what grade you're going to get on a test you're taking, right? Some people have massive test anxiety. We know that's not a threat to survival, but it feels like it in their body. Or maybe they just have this memory playing on repeat of something they said to someone earlier that day. Hello, social anxiety. That used to be a massive struggle of mine, so I know what that's like. For me, also, I used to have this massive anxiety about whether somebody new I met was going to like me, right? That's not a survival situation. Or for other people, it's meeting a deadline at work or getting on an airplane or driving in a car, or seeing a spider in the corner, right? I see this all day long in my neuroplasticity practice. The brain makes all kinds of errors about what is a true threat to survival. And this causes us a whole lot of unnecessary mental, emotional, and physical misery, right? And that's why we are helping people out of these issues all the time, because we actually have the tools that can stop it. So here are a few examples from the research of a major injury resulting in no pain. And actually, some of these are anecdotal. Not all of them are from the research, I should say that. It's been well documented that many soldiers with severe injuries, even losing a limb, report little or no pain at the time of the incident. President Reagan reported he felt no pain when he was shot in 1981. Studies of pain-free individuals have shown via MRI that at least 64% have a bulging disc, a protruding disc, a herniated disc, or degeneration of a disc. And 38% have more than one affected disc. But those people are not having pain. So many people have also undergone major surgery while hypnotized and with no anesthesia and had no pain. So these kinds of cool things are the basis of why we know the brain is responsible for all pain. We also have examples of the brain generating pain when there's no injury, sometimes just the perception of it. So this is a great case study I think you'll enjoy. There was this man who stepped on a nail, and he showed up at the ER in excruciating pain. And when they removed his shoe, they discovered the nail went right between his toes and didn't damage anything other than his shoe. And as soon as he saw with his own eyes that his foot was fine, his pain started to subside immediately and fully resolved. This kind of thing is not uncommon. In a study of volunteers, where volunteers placed their head inside a fake stimulator and were told that there was going to be a current run through their head, if they were told, oh, just a low level of current is being run, they would experience very little pain. If they were told, oh, we're running a really strong current through your head now, the study participants' pain would increase proportionally. And this was even though no stimulation or current was given at all. So there's this other really interesting study I think you guys will like. It was a study of whiplash. So there's this fascinating phenomenon where nobody in Lithuania has whiplash syndrome. And these researchers wanted to study why that was, because in other countries, up to 10% of people become permanently disabled by pain after a whiplash incident. So these German researchers conducted a study in which they recruited volunteers for a car crash study. They were placed in the driver's seat of a car, and a simulation was created that made it seem as though they were slammed from behind by another car. It was a fake collision, but it seemed real because they had all these sounds play through these speakers that sounded like crunching metal. And they had broken glass that they strewn about on the floor. And the reality was that the car they were in moved slightly forward only via some ramps and some pulleys. There was no actual contact from the other car. 3 days after the collision, 20% of people had neck pain. 4 weeks later, 10% still had that neck pain. And their pain was real, but there was no structural damage to their necks. The pain came from their belief that they had been in a collision. Yes, pretty cool stuff. Who likes these examples? So these examples illustrate perfectly why pain is defined by the International Association for the Study of Pain as a sensory and emotional experience, not as signaling from peripheral pain nerves. So the moral of the story is, even if you hit your finger with a hammer, the pain is still all in your head, i.e., it's coming from your brain, but it is real pain. So if a danger signal comes from one of those peripheral nerves and it does make it all the way up the spinal cord to the brain, and this is coming from an injury or an inflammation, the brain still has the task of trying to put that danger signal into context, and it still might or might not induce pain. It's going to cross-reference all the other information coming in through the senses and the immune system, where the body is in space in relation to other things, temperature, and all kinds of other things. And it's going to make meaning of it by referencing your memories, your thoughts, your level of attention, and your emotional state as a way of determining, does all that sensory data mean you are in danger or not? So let's start talking about chronic pain, because it is a unique beast. And the reason for that is that the reason it's very different from acute pain is because of the changes in the brain and spinal cord that take place as pain becomes chronic. The scientific term for those changes is called central sensitization. So you'll hear me throw that term about in the rest of this, but these changes are the same reason why attempts at addressing tissue injury and inflammation in chronic pain patients almost never resolves the pain. No matter whether that be through physical therapy, massage, chiropractic, acupuncture, injections, corticosteroid or regenerative surgery, or other means that are focused on the body. That's because the pain is either no longer being caused by any tissue injury and may not have been in the first place, or because the brain has become overreactive to sensory stimuli from the body. Either way, the brain is the key to getting pain relief and resolution. And we now know that many cases of central sensitization completely lack any danger signaling from the peripheral nerves in the body at all. And rather, it's just ordinary stimuli coming through, like light touch and slight temperature changes and things like that. And the brain is misinterpreting those as dangerous and therefore making pain an error. So there are a lot of different changes that are occurring at a neurological level that create that centrally sensitized chronic pain state. I'm not going to bore you with most of them, but I want you to focus on the most important ones that really can be reversed to reverse the chronic pain state. So what research has made very clear is that the brain literally reorganizes itself as acute pain becomes chronic, forming new and stronger neural connections over time that facilitate both the generation of pain when there shouldn't be pain and emotional suffering. And those two are completely linked in the chronic pain state. I think that's obvious about why they would be, why pain would make somebody feel like they're emotionally suffering. But what's happening in the brain also shows that as the brain changes over time, it stops being active in areas that are more related to pain and sensation and becomes active in the areas about emotion and threat. So one of the ways the brain is making this change is through practice makes perfect, right? This is the way that we learn pretty much everything. It's the way memories are formed as well. So in practice makes perfect, it's basically those pain pathways in the brain are firing so often that you're just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And when a neural network gets stronger, it becomes more easy to fire. And so things that wouldn't have set it off before now do set it off, and it starts firing when it shouldn't. The other things that are happening are Pavlovian and fear conditioning, right? Have you guys heard of Pavlov's dog? I'm sure many of you have. But Pavlov was the first researcher to realize that the brain links things together that are coming at the same time, right? What fires together, wires together is the kind of colloquial phrase that people use to describe this. So in Pavlov's experiment, he rang a bell and then fed the dog, rang a bell, fed the dog, rang a bell, fed the dog. He did this over and over again. And then eventually he rang the bell and didn't feed the dog. And he kept doing that. And the dog kept salivating every time, right? That's because the dog's brain made that link and said, oh, when he rings the bell, I get food. So I get excited when he rings the bell. And this wasn't happening on a conscious level. This was a subconscious process in the dog's brain. So contextual cues, like what's happening around a person when somebody first develops a pain condition, and each time they experience that pain, lead to danger. The more times a certain context is linked to pain or danger, the stronger the neural connection becomes and the more easily it fires when those cues are present or even thought about. So as an example, let's say someone thought they, quote, threw their back out, right? Maybe they lifted something heavy and then they had a pain. The brain will link lifting something heavy to danger. And if the person continues to be afraid of lifting heavy things or continues to experience pain when they lift heavy things, that neurological association will get stronger and stronger until eventually the brain will be able to generate that pain just from the person thinking about or imagining lifting something heavy. And that's why if you do go to a doctor who's trained to recognize this type of pain, they will use that experiment of having you imagine lifting something heavy or whatever your trigger usually is, and see if it makes your pain worse. And that is used as an assessment to decide, is your pain largely coming from your brain or is it coming from something going on in your body? So here we're going to start talking about fear. And when I talk about fear, I'm going to loop in anxiety and you're going to see why. But fear and anxiety, unfortunately, fuel the development of chronic pain, and the literature is super clear about that. And so as I bring this up, I want you to know that what I'm about to describe is very normal and would be expected in anyone developing a pain condition. That being said, the more we know about how this works, the more we can interrupt this sort of natural way of responding to pain so that we don't facilitate the development of chronic pain. And in fact, if we already have it, we start reversing it. So as chronic pain develops, as somebody has pain that just isn't going away, the person usually also develops some fearful beliefs, such as, and sadly, sometimes doctors perpetuate these or instill these beliefs, which is a tragedy. But one of them might be, my back is fragile and must be protected. Or bending over will hurt my back, so I can't do it. Or this pain is really bad, so it must mean something is seriously wrong with my body. And the reality is, in most chronic pain states, none of those things are true. Most people that start to develop chronic pain also develop really anxious thoughts around it. Like, what if this pain never goes away and I have to go on disability and I can't support my family and we end up in poverty? Or I've tried everything and nothing is working. I'm going to suffer the rest of my life. Or my doctor says I might have to live with this, but I don't think I can live like this. If I have pain tomorrow, how am I going to be able to get through work? How am I going to make food, take care of the kids, right? Can you sense this really high level of stress response that people are experiencing as they think these thoughts and act out of these beliefs? The fear and anxiety that people experience in conjunction with these thoughts and beliefs about their bodies unfortunately reinforces to the brain that both the pain and the activities that they believe to be dangerous are true threats. And all of these fears experienced so frequently actually turn on threat centers in the brain, like the amygdala. And since pain is also a protective mechanism to threat, the experience of pain itself and all of these feared activities and stimuli then go on to trigger more pain in the chronic centrally sensitized pain patient. So I'll give you one more example. Let's say somebody was diagnosed with chronic neck pain. Hi, Chantel. Hello, everyone. Thanks for making comments. I love seeing you guys here. Let's say somebody was diagnosed with chronic neck pain and they were told it's because they have a bulging disc. Never mind the fact that the disc may never have been the cause of the pain, might have just been an incidental finding on imaging. But the patient is told to avoid bending their neck forward, avoid lifting heavy items, and sleeping with their neck in certain positions. And because this person really wants to avoid the pain is very motivating, they then become afraid of these body positions and movements. And the brain then links those positions and movements to threat. And now a danger response is triggered in the brain when the person does those things or even thinks about doing them. And as a response to that danger signaling, the brain then makes more pain to try to protect the person. It's a vicious feedback loop. I think you're realizing this. So as that person starts to experience pain more frequently and in more context because the threats are becoming broader and more generalized in their brain, they're likely experiencing more and more fear of the pain itself and anxiety about triggering it. And the brain is linking pain to danger even more strongly. So when the pain comes on or when the pain flares, the person has an even more intense stress or survival response to it, and the brain produces even more pain to the perceived threat. So here is the cool study I was talking about, done in 2013, where they captured the neurological changes taking place in people as they went from having acute pain to that pain becoming chronic pain. And they were looking at their brains every quarter during that year using fMRI scans, which basically show brain activity, like where the primary brain activity is occurring in the brain. And we now have these big databases that document like, oh, this sort of activity signature tends to go with pain, and this sort of activity signature tends to go with emotion. And plenty of other things too have been studied in that context. But what they found is that if someone is going to develop chronic pain, the changes in the brain that cause chronic pain take place between 6 and 12 months after the pain began. They were also able to show that as someone goes from acute to chronic pain, the brain activity, average brain activity, shifts from areas solely related to pain and sensation to areas related to emotion, memory, and threat. So what does that mean? Well, the authors concluded, based on the data and other data that have been gathered about chronic pain, is that chronic centrally sensitized pain is an emotionally driven learning process. Yes, that's right. Emotions drive this process, and it is a learning process. The brain learns what is perceived as a threat and reorganizes into that chronic pain producing state. So you might be wondering, well, how do I tell if I'm one of those people whose chronic pain is really being brain generated versus body generated, injury generated, etc.? Well, I'm going to walk you through some key features here. We're going to go through them kind of fast because I got a lot of other things to tell you, but these are some key features you can look for yourself. And when we release the chronic pain mini course, there's also going to be a questionnaire where you can just go ahead and do this on paper or do it in an electronic format and score it for yourself. So some of these questions are taken straight from the questionnaire used by prominent pain researchers and clinicians to help evaluate if somebody's pain is centrally sensitized, otherwise known as neuroplastic. Others are taken straight from the research literature on the features of chronic centrally sensitized pain. So what I suggest is that you add 1 point to your score for each one you answer yes to. The higher your score, the more likely it is that your pain is coming primarily or just from your brain at this point. Even if you had a prior injury, even if you have evidence of an abnormality in your body, like a bulging disc that might explain the pain, if you have a yes answer to a number of these, there's a very high chance that that bodily abnormality is actually not the cause of the pain anymore, and maybe it never was. Any no answers to these questions do not rule out neuroplastic pain. It's actually really common that people who have neuroplastic pain may only say yes to even 3 of these or 6 of these. And those people are still able to rewire their brain to get out of chronic pain. Okay, so number 1, did your pain originate during a time of stress or emotional upset? That's a good indicator. Number 2, the pain started without an injury, or it persisted well past the normal healing time for that type of injury, right? So an example of this might be you sprained your ankle and a year later, you're still in excruciating pain from it. That's not a normal healing trajectory from a sprained ankle, right? Number 3, the pain is inconsistent. Sometimes certain activities cause pain. Other times those same activities don't cause pain or cause a lot less pain. So as an example, let's say sometimes driving for an hour for you causes 8 out of 10 pain. And other times it only causes 4 out of 10 pain. This is not how an injury behaves. This is a really good indicator of the pain being caused by the brain. Number 4, you have a lot of other symptoms or multiple pain conditions. So when the brain is responsible for chronic pain, that chronic pain tends to pop up in other areas of the body, more areas of the body over time. So it's very common to see people with centrally sensitized pain who have migraines, chronic low back pain, and chronic knee pain, as an example, or who have fibromyalgia, IBS-related pain, and chronic pelvic pain. In fact, the pain associated with irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, and chronic pelvic pain are considered by researchers now to be pretty much always centrally sensitized or brain-mediated pain conditions. Number 5, the pain spread over time. So maybe it started in your hand and it spread to your wrist and your fingers, or it moves around, right? So one day the right knee hurts, the next day the left knee hurts. In the morning you have low back pain, and in the afternoon you have mid back pain. That's another indicator of brain-mediated pain. The pain is triggered or dramatically worsened by stress or emotional upset, and often subsides temporarily when you are thoroughly distracted or really enjoying yourself. And if you've never watched this in yourself, like what happens to your pain when you do get really distracted or like really into something and or you're really having a good time, I would suggest you start observing that, because it's very common for centrally sensitized pain to subside, at least partially and temporarily, when that's the case. And I think that makes sense, right? When your brain is distracted, it is not as able to produce the pain state, right? It's a competition between these different brain areas. Number 7, you have pain triggers that have little to do with your body, injury, or pain. Like your pain gets triggered by light, sounds, smells, people, certain places, etc. Number 8, you have pain in identical locations on both sides of your body. This is not so common with injuries to have identical ones on both sides. That's why that's an indicator. You often have pain after completing an activity, but you feel fine during the activity. Like you're fine while you're hiking, but then you're in agony for 3 days afterwards. That's not common if injury-generated pain. Number 10, you experience some childhood trauma between the years of 0 and 17. Trauma or adversity, pretty much anything that made you feel unsafe regularly or significantly while growing up. That is my definition. So there is a list of big T traumas that, have considered universally to have an impact on pretty much everyone when they're experienced in childhood. These are the ones that are listed in the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And most people would recognize these things as traumatic. But there are plenty of smaller traumas that can really add up for people and can also contribute to the development later on of chronic illness or chronic pain. So those things are like including experiencing violence in the home, experiencing emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. One that a lot of people don't realize is on this list is being neglected, basically not being paid attention to, not having your basic needs met sometimes by your caretakers. And actually the research shows that in many cases that is just as detrimental as abuse. So witnessing violence in the community is even on this list. Having a family member attempt or die from suicide, definitely substance use problems in a family member, mental health problems in a family member, instability or household members in jail or prison, not having enough food, homelessness, unstable housing, experiencing discrimination, serious bullying, parental divorce or separation. All of those things are now linked to a much higher likelihood of developing chronic pain later in life. And I'm going to explain why that is a little bit later. So this next one, I kind of grouped together a whole bunch of other traits that can predispose people to development of chronic pain, but I would actually suggest you add 1 point to your score for each of these that you say yes to. So those things are you're a perfectionist, an overachiever, a compulsive do-gooder, even at the expense of yourself, right? Or an over caretaker is also in that category, right? So you take care of other people before yourself always, even when it means you hurt yourself. You're highly self-critical, you were an anxious person before the pain began, or you consistently put a lot of pressure on yourself. And I'll also explain why those predispose to the development of chronic pain too. Number 12, doctors have been unable to find a physical cause for your pain. 13, your pain is disproportionate to the nature or extent of the injury or pathology in that area. So like, let's say you have an overuse injury in your elbow, like tennis elbow, right? And sometimes it causes you pain above a 10 out of 10, so much that you are like sweating and feeling like screaming and nearly passing out or vomiting. That is not proportionate to the nature of the injury, right? So we're looking for things like that to indicate that the brain is the issue. Your pain is widespread throughout the body, like fibromyalgia. As I said, fibro has been pretty solidly classified in the literature as a centrally sensitized pain syndrome, along with IBS and chronic pelvic pain and a few other pain disorders. Typical treatments for injury-related pain or tight muscles or things like that have not helped. So things like massage, chiropractic, physical therapy, injections, acupuncture, cold laser, TENS devices, nerve blocks, surgeries, etc. If you have tried a number of those things and none of them really helped much, that's an indication that your brain is actually more of the issue than the body. If you've tried anti-inflammatory medications like NSAIDs, such as ibuprofen, and they didn't help, that's also an indication, right? Because these pretty much only help if there is a peripheral injury, like a bodily injury or some inflammation related to that. Conversely, if you have tried an anti-epileptic drug, one of the most common prescribed in chronic pain is Lyrica, or you have been put on an antidepressant for the pain like amitriptyline, and those have helped, that's an indication that it's centrally sensitized pain, because these drugs work on the brain and on emotional circuits. So your pain sometimes comes on spontaneously without any provocation, right? Such as you're just lying down completely still, just chilling, and then boom, the pain gets dramatically worse. Or it just comes on like you weren't having it, and then boom, here's the pain, right? That is an indication that it's more of a brain thing, right? That's not really how injuries respond. 19, the pain tends to be worse at night and super disruptive of sleep. That's more common in centrally sensitized pain. And your pain comes along with other abnormal sensations. So sometimes in centrally sensitized pain, the brain is also producing other odd sensations besides pain, like burning, coldness, buzzing, vibrating, crawling sensations, etc. There's definitely more things that could be on that list, but you get the picture, I think. If your pain is easily provoked to a super high severity level and it takes a long time to settle it down, that's more likely to be neuroplastic. If you can think about the pain and make it worse just by thinking about it, that lends itself. Yeah, I'm getting some responses from people that they have all of these or many of them. And you're definitely not alone. I'm glad you're here and you're taking this quiz with me, because it's actually really exciting. If you have positive answers to all these, it means you have a way out of pain. You have a way of resolving it, not just managing it for the rest of your life. So I hope that that makes that not feel like a bad thing as you realize you are answering yes to many of these. If you can imagine, like you are just closing your eyes, not moving your body, and you're imagining doing an activity that would normally trigger the pain to get worse, and the pain actually gets worse while you are not moving, that is a very strong indicator that your pain is coming from your brain. So if you want further explanation of a lot of these questions, a good place to read about them and get a lot more education about neuroplastic chronic pain is The Way Out by Alan Gordon. He's a very well-known pain psychologist, and helped to design the Boulder back pain study, which we're going to talk about because it's super cool and very encouraging for all of you folks out there who are realizing you have neuroplastic pain. This slide, I'm not going to describe to you, but basically these are things that you can ask your doctor to assess for you on physical exam to help confirm that your pain is centrally mediated. So these are some things that they can assess that way. So what percentage of chronic pain patients are estimated to have this centrally sensitized or neuroplastic pain, as opposed to an ongoing injury-generated pain or an inflammation-generated pain? As we'll see in the Boulder back pain study, it appears to be the vast majority, and leading pain specialists are estimating it to be over 85% of cases. So the great news is that means if you're in that category, the resolution, the treatment to get out of it is extremely safe. It's non-invasive, it's super empowering, and it is effective. So here's a nice little break because I know I've been talking at you guys with really a lot of information like a fire hose. So this is my dog, and she often helps me work just by cuddling with me. All right, so now we're going to talk about this link between emotions and pain a little bit more deeply. So if you have taken any of our free courses, you know that we teach about fight, flight, and freeze and their physical effects on the body a lot. But they also have emotional correlates. Like when you're in fight or flight, you are absolutely going to be experiencing something particular on the emotional spectrum, right? So much so that it's implied in the colloquial names for these states, right? So if you're in fight, caused by sympathetic nervous system activation, it's linked to anger, and you will be experiencing something like anger or irritability or resentment. If you're in flight, that's the other side of the coin for that sympathetic nervous system activation, you're going to be feeling fear or anxiety or worry or something similar. The freeze state tends to come along with feelings that we tend to associate with depression, like apathy, lack of motivation, spaciness, brain foggy feeling, fatigue, and often also comes on when we're experiencing other emotional states that we consider pretty painful, like worthlessness, hopelessness, helplessness, sadness, guilt, and shame. The quote, rest, digest, and heal state that you've heard about, I'm sure, is associated with parasympathetic, specifically ventral vagal activation of the nervous system. And it's associated with all manner of positive emotional states, right? Joy, love, compassion, gratitude, feeling safe and calm, all these kinds of things. And it facilitates social behaviors in all mammals, like cooperation and sharing and communication. So considering that fight, flight, and freeze are survival states that turn on when your brain is perceiving a threat, it should be no surprise that they can amplify or fuel or induce pain, because pain is also a protective response the brain can generate to a perceived threat. So I'm going to skip these examples in the interest of time, but you can go back and read them. They're great experiments where researchers have basically made it very clear how much our emotions impact our experience of pain. And it's basically a vicious feedback loop. Pain triggers feelings of fear and anxiety in the majority of people. The fear puts the brain on high alert. The feeling of being in danger triggers more pain, which leads to more fear. And the fear of chronic pain turns pain chronic. But fear is not the only emotion that increases pain. Some chronic pain patients will say, I don't feel afraid of my pain, but I'm super frustrated with it. I feel despair about it all the time. I worry about it constantly. I'm angry at it. I'm annoyed at it. All of these have the same effect on the nervous system of making it feel more threatened. And that reinforces the pain, unfortunately, even though these emotional responses to the pain are perfectly normal and understandable. But as I said, the more we know about what they're doing, the more we have control of shifting this so that we stop reinforcing the pain cycle. And other mental and emotional patterns that tend to trigger stress and threat responses in the nervous system and therefore fuel or create pain are some of the things I also talked about on that questionnaire: perfectionism, overachieving, putting pressure, self-criticism, people-pleasing, blah, blah, blah. All of them imply I have to do X, Y, or Z, otherwise I'm not safe or I'm not worthy, which are both very dangerous prospects to the brain. So there are also a lot of great case studies. Some of them are mine. I'm going to share a few of them with you that really illustrate how stress and emotions can be the primary instigator and the driver of a chronic pain state. So we're going to talk about Patty now, Coach Patty, who is one of the co-creators of the Wired for Wellness group and program. Patty developed chronic pain during an extremely stressful time in her life, full of moving a number of times, raising children, overworking at her private practice, having several deaths in short succession, people that really meant a lot to her, her brother having a massive car accident. And after all of this stress and grief started piling up, pain became her constant companion. Initially, it was intermittent, it would come and go. And then eventually the straw broke and the pain became constant, along with a lot of anxiety and fear of the pain and of certain activities, which seemed to be the triggers, seemed to make it worse. And she was a massage therapist by trade at the time. So she tried every physical treatment she could to, quote, fix her body, but they never provided any lasting relief. And it would be quite a few years before she discovered neuroplasticity techniques for this and slowly started the process of retraining her brain to feel safe in all aspects of her life, including with the pain present and in doing the activities that she had avoided for a long time because she was afraid they would cause pain. She also rewired a bunch of emotional traumas and childhood programming that got her into that constant state of overwhelm. She was definitely a self-identified people pleaser. And as she did that, the pain started to fade until eventually it just went away. And today, Patty almost never has pain. And if she does have a little bit of pain come back in her back, she knows exactly how to stop the pain because she knows now that for her, it's a direct indication that she is stressed about something or upset about something, and she has not been looking at it. So yeah, she's got a great case. Let's talk about one more. One of my clients, let's call her Ashley, developed severe, very frequent migraine headaches. This happened during a time when she was overworking at work to the extreme, trying to ensure that her work was perfect. She was a definite perfectionist. And she was also being abused at that time by a narcissistic boss. And she was the type to put endless pressure on herself, and her boss did the same. She was also dealing with intense emotional distress from a difficult relationship with her parents, and she became continuously anxious and depressed, couldn't sleep, developed digestive issues, and was always exhausted on top of the migraines. By the time she was referred to me, she had been working with a very talented naturopathic physician and therapist for over a year, but she continued to get worse. She continued to spiral to the drain. And when she began rewiring her traumatic experiences, her stressful belief systems, her conditioned stress responses to a variety of triggers, all her symptoms resolved, including the migraine headaches. And that all happened in the first month of her doing this neuroplasticity work. She also got a new job and went back to work. She had actually been not working for 6 months prior because she was so debilitated by her medical conditions. And she went back to work within a month of starting working with me. And she's been able to work ever since, still maintains a prestigious job, and doesn't experience the same intense levels of stress about it anymore. So let's touch on trauma. I mentioned that I was going to explain how trauma leads to chronic pain. Well, first, we'll just say this relationship is well established. Studies have shown, yep, if you've got a lot of trauma, you're more likely to have pain. Multiple studies from around the world have showed actually a dose-response relationship, which means the more trauma you've had, the more likely you're going to develop chronic pain, right? The higher the risk. And the presence of early trauma, childhood trauma, appears to increase the risk by at least 2 to 3 times. And they've also shown that PTSD increases the incidence of pain disorders, including musculoskeletal pain disorders, and those that are more obviously linked to central sensitization, like irritable bowel syndrome, chronic pelvic pain, and fibromyalgia. So how is trauma doing this? Well, on a base level, it causes the nervous system to get stuck in a high arousal state, spending more time in fight or flight or freeze, producing excess cortisol, stress hormone, even when that person's not under particular stress. And when they do excrete cortisol response to stress, they do excrete their stress hormone, they excrete more of it, and it lasts longer, the cortisol response, than an average person's. And this altered stress physiology that occurs after trauma leaves the nervous system in a survival mode, makes all types of danger responses from the brain more common, right? Whether that be anxiety, depression, PTSD phenomenon like flashbacks, intrusive fearful thoughts, disturbed sleep, poor concentration, increased body tension, avoidance behaviors, feeling less trusting of other people, and pain. Because remember, pain is a protective mechanism to threat, and it can be employed by the brain for any type of threat. So that's how that happens. But why does the brain believe we're still under threat after a traumatic experience has clearly ended? Well, for this, we'll have to talk a little bit about memories. So everything we experience from the moment we're born till the moment we die is stored in our subconscious, in our memory bank. The vast majority of these experiences we can't remember consciously. Like, do you remember the first time you tried to read? Probably not, right? But your subconscious does, and it uses the compilation of your experiences you had while learning to read to allow you to read fluently today and automatically, right? You don't have to relearn it every time you do it. And you don't have to sound out the words like you did as a kid, right? This is the subconscious. I mean, it's amazing that the subconscious can do this. It creates efficiency for us by automating things. And this process is brilliant when it comes to learning skills. So we don't have to try to relearn them all the time, but it also applies to emotional learning and automated emotional responses. So, including nervous system responses, right? And those then lead to automated behavioral responses. And it is creating those automations as well based on our experiences and the emotional context of those experiences, especially the ones that happened before the age of 7. So every memory generally has an emotional and nervous system tag if it was an emotional experience, right? And some are stronger than others, depending on the intensity of the emotional reaction we had at the time. So the subconscious will then reproduce that emotional or nervous system state in the future whenever we find ourselves in a similar situation. As an example of how the brain learns how to react emotionally through experience, when you watch babies and young children, if they fall down and hurt themselves, you'll usually see them look at mom and dad, right? If you're a parent, this has happened to you. They're looking at you to try to learn what the appropriate response should be. And if mom or dad looks upset and rushes in to comfort and soothe, the child will usually burst into tears. If mom and dad giggle and smile and say, "Oopsie, looks like you fell down," the child will usually get right back up, get back to playing, and get back to never have an emotional outburst, right? They'll just whoop, brush right by it. So you would think that getting hurt would always warrant an instinctual response to get upset, but it doesn't. This response is learned. And what you learn early on often becomes the template for how you'll respond to that type of circumstance for the rest of your life, unless you have some great neuroplasticity tools that can change that, right? We don't come out of the womb knowing that the sound of a gunshot is dangerous. We just know it's a loud noise, right? However, if you hear a gunshot and somebody then tells you that sound is dangerous and guns can kill you and you're old enough to know what that means, or you witness somebody get hurt as a result of a gunshot noise and you react feeling fear, now you've got a strong survival association to the sound of a gunshot. And when you hear one in the future, without consciously thinking about it, you're going to have a nervous system reaction to that. So another thing that subconscious does, we already talked about, is it makes links between two things that are going on at the same time, right? So if you grew up with a very anxious parent who generally felt unsafe in the world and was always warning you about various potential threats in the world, this belief system, the world is unsafe, is likely to be adopted as your own subconscious belief system and play out as your own anxious tendencies later in life. In regards to pain, if somebody grows up with a parent in chronic pain, witnessing that parent's suffering, the way that it caused them to live in poverty, on disability, become addicted to pain medications, living lots of fears and avoidance behaviors, that child will likely develop a lot of fear and anxiety themselves about pain, right? They'll likely develop some belief systems like pain equals disability, dependency, suffering, addiction, fear, right? And as a result, that kid may develop body hypervigilance, always looking for pain as a threat. And if that person then develops acute pain for some reason, their fear conditioning and belief systems around pain may actually fuel their acute pain becoming chronic. That's just what the data suggests. So you can imagine if we've had a lot of traumatic experiences or have been indoctrinated with a lot of fearful belief systems as a young person, it can set our nervous system up to be on high alert for the rest of our lives unless we use neuroplasticity to rewire those pivotal experiences and the belief systems that came from them, essentially changing the actual neural connections in the brain. That's what we can do now. So in the present moment, the brain is always looking around for an indication that we might be in danger. What we perceive as dangerous is based on our individual past and our individual belief systems. So now let's bring this back around to how the brain makes mistakes in determining what's truly dangerous. Okay, when we experience something with a strong negative emotional charge, like we feel stressed as it's happening, or we feel anxious or afraid or angry, or intense sadness or loss during the event, the limbic system will tag that event and many aspects of what was going on during that event to threat. It then will begin constantly looking for anything similar to that and going forward to try to help us by warning us of the danger. How does it warn us? It can warn us through our survival responses, putting us into fight, flight, or freeze if it recognizes something from your past that seemed dangerous, or even pain. So there's there are a lot of great examples of this, but one of them is like if somebody gets robbed, let's say by a person wearing a red hoodie and Axe deodorant, but the scent and the red shirt, those may be stored by the brain as cues of danger, which in psychology is called evocative cues. So meaning that seeing someone in a red shirt or smelling that scent can trigger the same type of survival response that the person had during the robbery, not in their conscious control. So that person might be on the bus, smell someone wearing that deodorant, and then boom, suddenly they're having a full-blown panic attack, and they may have no idea why. That's because the subconscious initiated that survival response based on the information it had stored about Axe deodorant smell being neurologically linked to danger. And this happens all the time in even more unfortunate situations. So as I mentioned before, with pain experiences, this association process can lead to maladaptive survival and pain responses. Basically, those things are occurring at inappropriate times to things that are not truly dangerous, but that seemed to be the cause or be related to the pain in the past, including things that actually had absolutely nothing to do with the pain that occurred, like the weather or what smell was present at the time or the person that was with them when that happened. And these associations are not conscious. And so the person may not realize at first that they seem to develop pain or their pain worsens whenever Joe is around because the subconscious is initiating that response for them. So now you've got a background of how the brain can literally reinitiate a nervous system response in the present when reminded of something in the past. You can see how if somebody has a lot of triggers linked to danger responses from past experiences, that they might be experiencing stress responses a lot when they don't need to be. And if they've experienced a big enough trauma that instills the underlying belief they are not safe in the world, then their brain will initiate a continuous survival physiology, right? That's when people get stuck in fight, flight, or freeze, and this predisposes to chronic pain. Anybody here feel like they are stuck in chronic survival mode and have been for a long time? because of trauma or because of a lot of stressful experiences, maybe a big, long period of chronic stress that just was unrelenting. Yeah, I used to be in that camp. After 10 years of medical school, all while being super sick, my body thought everything was dangerous and was stuck in that state all the time. So let's get to the boulder back pain study. This is what you're going to want to hear for massive inspiration for your own healing if you're struggling with chronic pain. So this is one of the newest studies. I believe it came out in 2022. Finally was published then. Using a neuroplasticity approach to resolve centrally sensitized chronic pain. So in this study, 33 out of 45 participants who completed 4 weeks of this neuroplasticity approach were pain-free or nearly pain-free at the end of that 4 weeks. That was 73% of those people. And they followed up with those people a year later, and they were still pain-free or nearly pain-free. So just to illustrate what kind of people these were, these participants in the study had had an average back pain duration of 10 years or more. 20 of these people in the treatment group had pre-existing spinal imaging, all of which showed at least one abnormality of their spine. 4 findings per patient was the median. So almost all the participants also reported being very skeptical that they could heal their pain via their brain. And yet they were desperate and willing to try. So most of them had formed pretty strong belief systems that their pain was being caused by a bodily injury or an inflammatory process. So they weren't coming in with the placebo effect of thinking like, yes, this is going to heal me. They were absolutely the opposite. So as I said, 73% of those people were pain-free or nearly pain-free in just 4 weeks. And they maintained that at a year. Other things that improved for them were they also had massive reductions in disability levels, anger, sleep disturbance, depression, and they had a massive positive increase in their mood that was maintained a year later. So another cool thing that was done in this study to validate the results these patients were getting is they did fMRI scans on these patients before and after the study, showing the significant changes in brain activity before and after the treatment. And I want to tell you about a few of the participants in the treatment group who became pain-free or nearly pain-free, so you can see just how severe the anatomical abnormalities can be while the pain is still neuroplastic, centrally sensitized, being created only by the brain, and therefore can be reversed. It might surprise you because the old paradigm would suggest that these patients could expect chronic pain for life just based on their altered anatomy. So one of these patients had severe scoliosis, 70% curvature of the spine. That is really severe. And that person had been told their whole life, yes, you can expect to have pain forever because of this spinal curvature. This was one of the people that became pain-free in the study. Another one was a football player, I believe previous college or pro football. He had severe disc herniations, massive disc degenerations at multiple levels, quite a bit of nerve impingement, had been told that his only option was surgery, although he'd been given lots of injections and pain medications that barely touched it. And he just didn't want surgery. So when the study came around and he was invited to be a part of it, he did it and he became pain-free. And you can actually hear his testimonial on Alan Gordon's podcast, which is just really a great podcast where you can get a lot of inspiration around healing from chronic pain because he interviews many people who have resolved their own chronic pain. So the brain can learn helpful new tricks, including how to turn off pain. Hallelujah, thank goodness. The goal of a neuroplasticity approach to resolving pain is first and foremost to make you feel safe, right? If you are the chronic pain person, the goal is for you to get to a place where you feel safe, especially when the pain is present, but also generally in your body and in life. Because we know that stress and negative emotions and stressful beliefs and memories and the state of the autonomic nervous system can all initiate, amplify, and perpetuate chronic centrally sensitized pain. Rewiring the neural networking underlying those is also a viable route to reversing it. So for the best results, this approach involves calming the autonomic nervous system, rewiring the learned habitual negative emotional reactions to the pain and to many other things in your life, rewiring the emotional underpinnings of limiting belief systems, as well as traumatic and stressful memories, which is all very doable, and reversing the learned neurological associations the brain has formed between pain and danger, other body sensations and danger, certain body positions and danger, and certain activities in danger, right? All of those are common associations made in the chronic pain brain. And on top of that, if you have learned threat responses to other non-life threatening aspects of life, like school assignments or making decisions or public speaking or social interactions, these associations ideally need to be rewired too for best results, because chronic centralized pain is best eliminated when the brain feels safe in as many contexts as possible that are not life-threatening. So essentially, we want to update the old neural networks related to stress and survival responses and non-life-threatening stimuli and contexts with new data of safety. And then we want to strengthen those new neural connections over time, allowing you to feel safe and calm and other positive emotional states too, in those contexts that used to make you feel afraid or unsafe, and just in general in your life. So we know that we can do this because of the data on memory reconsolidation. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that here because we cover it in pretty good detail in the 7-part free course. So I would go and check that out there. But basically, it is the process by which we know that we can update and change memories as well as most other neural networks in the brain. And we actually even know how to do it mechanistically at this point. So we can harness that process to change the brain in the way that we want to change it. It's not random. So yeah, as I'm saying, neural networking in general is editable. But in order for that to happen, we have to set certain conditions that the brain needs in order to edit that. And that's what we teach here in the free courses and also in our main brain training program. So all of these sorts of stored data around things that feel dangerous to us, feel threatening to us, including our own body sensations, all of those associations can be rewired in the brain. And sometimes rewiring memories is actually essential to showing the brain that it's actually safe and getting a pain response to turn off. So I'll give you one example of this. I went through a training, one of my neuroplasticity trainings, with a woman who had shared her story of chronic pain. She had chronic leg pain since the age of 10. At this point, she was in her 60s. There was no known injury that precipitated it. No doctors could figure it out. And she started learning neuroplasticity techniques. She applied really like general techniques of like trying to help her nervous system feel safe with some improvement, but not resolution. And then she suddenly had a repressed memory surface of sexual abuse when she was a girl. When that surfaced, the pain got a lot worse. And as she rewired the memory, dissipating all the sensory data she had stored from the experience and introducing more and more and more data of safety to change that memory, the pain faded and then went away completely. And it's been years and has not come back. Similarly, with my patient, Ashley, who I talked about with the chronic migraines, we never worked directly on her pain. We just worked on all the traumas and present day stress patterns that resolved, and that was enough to resolve the migraines. And this has been the case for a number of my patients with chronic pain conditions like chronic bladder conditions, chronic pelvic pain, IBS-related pain, etc. So we use various styles of brain rewiring techniques, and you'll see that if you've done the free courses. We're not married to any one approach because different processes work better for different brains. And all of these are designed to actually rewire your threat responses to a variety of different things. So one of our members in our group program reduced her pain with these techniques by over 75% in less than 3 weeks, using a variety of these processes, but also including a somatic tracking exercise several times per day. That particular style of exercise is, I believe, the first process in the 7-part free program. So if you haven't checked it out yet, and you're struggling with pain, I would definitely start to include that into your routine on a daily basis, as well as rotating through the other styles that are offered there. Another member stopped his leg pain in 6 weeks with the same multifaceted approach to rewiring his stress responses and his brain's pain habit. And still another member with severe, like average 7 to 10 out of 10 pain, reduced that nerve pain by over 50% in less than a month, and it continues to go down. So we hope you start rewiring your own stress, anxiety, and pain programming using the guided processes we provided in both those free courses. And if you get stuck or you want more individualized support, it's available. We're here to help. As I suggested, you can start this process absolutely with the free programs, and I suggest trying all of them, rotating through them, right? Seeing what works best for you and sticking with the ones that are really, really working for you. Pain is inevitable as humans, but chronic pain and suffering do not have to be. The best part about this approach is that it's safe, it's non-invasive, it's not addictive, it's empowering, and it will improve your quality of life in many more ways than just improvement of physical pain. As you probably gathered from a lot of these cases, mental and emotional well-being and dramatic improvements in quality of life are natural byproducts. So thank you so much for listening. And again, if you do want to reach out for more personalized support to deal with any of these common issues we work with, let us know that you want us to reach out to you. And we'd be happy to start discussing how we can support you. All right. Have a good night, everyone.